Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome back to the final day of Sustainable Tallahassee's 50th anniversary of Earth Day video series. This is day 8 in our live stream series. And I want to thank everyone who's been here for all 8 nights, especially those of you who have been here for all 8 nights. But even those of you who have popped in here and there for a topic that you might have found interesting, thank you for participating in this, and thank you for being a part of our 50th anniversary celebration. We really wanted to do this in person. We had some grand plans for a big community-wide event to help celebrate this momentous occasion for Earth Day. 50 years is really nothing to sneeze at. So we had wanted to do it in person, but unfortunately, due to the COVID crisis, we could not, and we had to do it. We pivoted to doing this video series, which I think has been interesting in its own way. We've been able to see a lot of different areas of Sustainable Tallahassee, look into a lot of the programs and the people who make up our organization. I especially want to thank all of the people who helped to make this program a reality, especially the stars of each of our videos. So Jack Dieselhorst, Jerry Winkleblack, Gail Hankinson, Savannah Roach, Sean Youngblood, and Lizette Kelly, Bergen Schwartz, and Henry, and I forget Henry's last name, I'm sorry, from Green Drinks on Monday night. And then Peggy and Pam Doffak from last night for our Rags to Bags piece. And tonight, I'm really excited to be the main speaker. I want to tell a little bit about the story of how I came to Sustainable Tallahassee, and that'll lead directly into the topic for tonight, which is electric vehicles. So prior to coming to Sustainable Tallahassee, I had actually worked for the state energy office here in Florida, and alternative fuel vehicles was my main area of focus. And so I pretty early on in around the 2011, 2012 range, developed an interest in EVs via the programs I was working on. This was the very early stages of electric vehicle development. The Nissan Leaf had just come out. The Chevy Volt had been out for maybe a year or two. And the Tesla Model S was the hottest thing on the market. It was brand new, and it was really pushing the envelope for what electric vehicles could be. And when I left the energy office and I go to work for Florida State University, and I became a graduate student there, I was working on electric vehicle adoption research. And I was looking for EV owners. This was back in 2017, and I was really looking for people who were early adopters, people who had were innovators in this space, and were some of the very first owners of electric vehicles. And so I came to Sustainable Tallahassee to ask them if they knew of any EV owners, if they could connect me with anyone. And they were able to, and I got a really great research project out of that ended up being my my thesis for my graduate program. And it led me to be a volunteer. And after volunteering there for about a year on a couple of our programs related to electric vehicles, I was asked to be on the board of directors and eventually became president of the organization. And it's been an absolutely rewarding experience. I have loved every minute of being a member of Sustainable Tallahassee. It has been absolutely enjoyable to be a member and fun to be a part of these programs, but it's also been very rewarding to know that I'm helping to make a difference in this community. So the show for you tonight is really just it's kind of a shortened version of my Green Drinks presentation about electric vehicles. So I'm going to bring in a video here in a second, and it's not, I will admit, it's not quite as production value as the other ones. But I think you'll find it to be particularly interesting in its own way. So what you see on the right side of the screen there is actually me and my electric vehicle. So I own a Tesla Model 3. That's one of the newest electric vehicle models on the market up until about a couple months ago when the Tesla Model Y came out. It was the newest. And I got this car in about 2018 after being on the waiting list for it for about 2 years. So I actually put down a reservation for it in 2016, waited for 2 years, not knowing when and if that car was actually going to make it into production. And when it finally did, I was the happiest person in the world. And this video is the first road trip that I took in that car. I filmed the entire thing. You'll see this video plays for about 10 to 12 minutes, but it's actually 24 hours worth of video footage sped up 1,000 times. And it shows me driving from Tallahassee all the way down to Miami, driving around with a friend of mine from college, and then driving back. And I did this because one of the big questions that we usually get about electric vehicles is whether or not they can go on road trips for a long time, EVs were seen as in-town only cars. And so some of the first generation of EVs really were. The battery range on them was somewhere less than 100 miles in most cases. But the Model 3 has a range of 325 miles. So it's absolutely capable of going in between towns, really going anywhere. This car has absolutely replaced my gas car with zero compromises. And so this video is showing this trip to demonstrate what it's like to take one of these trips, and in its own way, sort of demonstrate how unremarkable it is, which is a good thing. We want these cars to be just the same as driving your gas car, but better. The thing that you might not be able to tell entirely here is that while I am driving this car, the car is also for the most part driving itself. Tesla vehicles have what's called autopilot. It's an advanced cruise control feature that, for the most part, takes control of the vehicle and drives almost fully autonomously. Especially on the highway like this is, it is almost entirely autonomously. My hands are on the wheel there as a safety precaution, as a part of the regulation regarding autonomous vehicles is that a driver is still engaged with the vehicle. So I have to have my hands on the wheel to move it a little bit to let the car know that I'm still there and still engaged in the event that I have to take it over. But otherwise, this car is driving itself. You'll see several times I'm unfortunately should not have, but I was perhaps texting while driving or checking my email or something like that. And you'll see in those moments the car is driving itself. But regardless of the autonomous vehicle part, I really want to talk about some of the benefits that all electric vehicles have. And there's really 5 main areas that we want to talk about. The first, of course, is the environmental benefits. I think most of us who are on this stream, who are friends of Sustainable Tallahassee, are aware that electric vehicles are good for the environment. They are certainly better than gasoline or diesel powered vehicles in that they produce zero emissions from the car itself. Now, of course, you do have emissions from generating the electricity that fuels the vehicles, but even in places where that electricity is generated by coal, driving an electric vehicle fueled by coal-generated electricity actually is more efficient and produces less emissions than driving a gasoline-powered car in the same area. And in a city like Tallahassee, where the majority of our electricity is generated via either natural gas or now increasingly solar, there are less and less emissions from these vehicles every day. And that's something that's really interesting about EVs and the electric grid, is that as the electric grid increasingly becomes more and more carbon-free via the addition of more solar power, more wind power, more hydro power, the cars get cleaner over time. And that's something that doesn't happen if you buy a gas car. The other aspect of electric vehicles is the performance. This is something that a lot of people don't really know about until they drive one for the first time. So electric vehicles produce all of the torque up front instantly. So if you're familiar with the way a gas-powered car works, right, you have cylinders that drive gears that drive the axle. And in each one of those steps, there is an opportunity for efficiency loss, where when you have to convert energy from chemical energy into heat energy into kinetic energy to drive the wheels, you lose a little bit of that energy in each one of those steps, and it takes a little bit longer to go through each one of those steps. But when you're in an electric car, you're actually just converting that chemical energy in the battery directly into kinetic energy. And so you skip all those other steps, you don't lose as much efficiency, and you're able to produce all of the energy all at once. And that leads to, frankly, really fast cars. The Tesla Model 3 here, like I'm driving, has a 0 to 60 time of 5 seconds, and it's the slowest car that Tesla makes. For those of you who are familiar with Tesla, you'll know that the fastest car that Tesla makes, the Model S P100D, has a 0 to 60 time of 2.5 seconds, and even that is likely going to be beat by the upcoming Tesla Roadster, which has a 0 to 60 time of sub 2 seconds. And these benefits extend not just to Teslas, but to any electric car, just due to the inherent nature of electric motors. The other aspect of electric cars that we like to talk about is the cost. So while the upfront cost of the vehicle may be more than a gas-powered car, and even that is starting to come down. So, for example, the Model 3 here starts at $38,000, which is pretty comparable to many new cars on the market. There's also some savings that you're going to experience in the cost of electricity to fuel the car versus the cost of gas to fuel the car. So electricity generally costs about 1/3 what it costs in gas to fuel a similarly sized car. So, for example, in normal times when oil is not negative price per barrel, the price of electricity for this car is about $1 per e-gallon, and that's a measure that was developed by the U.S. Department of Energy to be able to directly compare the amount of energy it takes, or the cost for the amount of energy it takes to drive an electric car 1 mile, and make it comparable to the price per unit of energy for a gas car to be able to drive 1 mile. So the last time that I looked pre-COVID, pre-oil crash, it was about $2.50 to about $3 a gallon for gasoline, and that was comparable to about $1 per e-gallon for an electric car. A lot of people also ask me, have I noticed the price of my electric bill going up due to charging at home? And the answer to that is really no. Especially because one of the things that you can do is you can switch your time of use charges, which is a benefit that the city of Tallahassee Utilities allows you to do, so that you pay less money on nights and weekends when you primarily charge. The other cost savings that many people don't realize with EVs is that because there are so many fewer moving parts, there are about 1/3 the number of moving parts in an electric vehicle as there are in a comparable gas or diesel powered vehicle. There's simply less things to break. And so if they don't break, they don't have to be replaced. And if they don't have to be replaced, you don't have to pay for them. I'm talking about things like belts and motors and gears and those kind of things in a gas engine that could have to be replaced, but also things like brakes. Electric vehicles have what's called regenerative braking, and that's when you essentially use the motor, which is a magnet, it's an electromagnet, to slow the axle, which means that you don't have to use the brakes, which means that you don't have to put pressure on the brake pads onto your wheels, which means that the brakes don't wear down, meaning that they have to be replaced less often. I had read that the typical Model 3 has to have brakes replaced once every 100,000 miles. So there's some cost savings associated with that as well. In addition to the obvious one is you don't have to change the oil in the car because there is no oil. Another area that a lot of people ask questions about is the charging. So where do you charge? How do you charge? And it's actually really simple. The vast majority of charging for these vehicles takes place at home in your garage or in your driveway. In fact, mine is charging right now in my driveway. It has a extension cord running off of my front porch down to my driveway on a regular 110 volt outlet. And that recharges the vehicle at a rate of about 5 miles per hour. And so in a place like Tallahassee, where it's a relatively small town, you're not driving very long distances every day, 5 miles an hour lets me recharge my entire commute overnight. And when you combine that with the 325 mile battery range, I never have any worries about range, especially not in town. A step up from the regular 110 volt outlet is what's known as level 2 charging. And those are what you may have seen out in front of places like Whole Foods or the Publix Greenwise on Gaines Street or other destinations like that. And those charge the vehicle at a rate of about 25 to 30 miles an hour. And they're usually for places where you're going to spend a decent amount of time and you've driven a decent amount of distance to get there. We're seeing more and more of these at places like restaurants, hotels, parks, destinations where you've, like I said, had to drive somewhere to get there. And they're also really convenient for topping off at work. So, for example, there's one of these at FSU where I work, and occasionally I'll go and charge it while I'm at work. And then the final level, as you may have just seen in the video there I stopped at, is what's called the direct current fast charging, or for Tesla, supercharging. And these are very high-speed charging stations that use direct current electricity, and they charge at a rate of about 500 or more miles per hour. And that's what lets you go on road trips. These stations are usually placed every 100 to 150 miles along major interstates. And they're located at places like restaurants or shopping centers or fancy gas stations like the Busy Bee gas station there on I-10. And they give you something to do. And I really didn't think that I was going to talk longer than my video ran. So I'll just start it over. And the fast charging network has grown tremendously over the last 10 or so years. Last count that Tesla had over 1,000 of these stations in the United States. That's Tesla alone. For all EV manufacturers, it was over 5,000 stations in the United States, and that's 5,000 locations. The actual number of charging stations at each one is vastly higher than that. But over 99% of the lower 48 states was within 100 miles of a fast charging station. So again, that will let you go anywhere in these cars. Range is really, in my opinion, not much of a concern anymore. The other cool thing about that is that when you're on these long distance road trips and you stop to charge, usually every 2 to 3 hours, it actually makes for a more relaxing drive. This is something that I would not have thought about prior to owning one of these vehicles, but before owning an electric car, I was very much one of those people who gets in the car, kind of just buckles in, and we're going to make it to wherever we're going, and we're going to drive straight through. But when an EV forces you to pull over and charge for about 30 minutes every 2 to 3 hours, you actually end up being more relaxed, more engaged when you're on the road, because you're not losing your focus because you're breaking it up like that. And then, of course, the autopilot really helps with that as well, because the autopilot takes a lot of the strain off of the driver and allows you to, kind of just monitor the road without having to monitor the exact function of the vehicle, which is kind of difficult to explain until the first time you do it. But it's really like, it's not quite like being a passenger, but it's also not as fully engaged. So a couple of things that Sustainable Tallahassee does to encourage EV use. We have an EV club. We are a number of members, or a number of people in the Tallahassee area who have electric vehicles. We meet on the last Monday of every month before Green Drinks. And we get together, we just talk about our EVs, ways to encourage other people to drive electric vehicles. And we also show them off to any interested people who are at those meetings. We also host an EV Expo twice a year. Once, usually with the Lemoyne Chain of Parks event. Of course, that got canceled this year. But then again, once in September as part of National Drive Electric Week. And this is our biggest event, where we bring in probably 30 to 40 electric vehicles of all different types. And we show them off to the public, and we tell people about our cars and why we like them and why we think that they should drive one. And then we've also recently begun to expand our efforts to include joining on to some national programs that are encouraging EV use. We're very proud to have recently been a part of a proposal submitted by the University of Central Florida Clean Cities Coalition to be a part of a national drive electric push. And so if that program is awarded by the U.S. Department of Energy, we'll be a part of a multi-state effort to encourage the use of electric vehicles. And then also, we're always looking for more programs, more ways to help encourage people to do this, such as this. One of the things that we're considering doing the next couple of weeks while we're still all at home is hosting a virtual ride and drive. So it would be a kind of like this, but it would be in the car. You'd be able to ask questions to the driver as we're driving around. And then finally, I just want to go ahead and mention again, for everyone who is new on this stream, and has not been here the last couple of days, Sustainable Tallahassee is a 501c3 nonprofit. We derive the vast majority of our funding from member contributions and from individual donors. And those contributions allow us to do things like this. They allow us to host the EV Expo. They allow us to coordinate the EV Club. And they allow us to be a part of those national kind of efforts like I was mentioning there. And they also allow us to produce content like this. It helps to be able to have the funding to be able to do this. And so if you're so inclined, we'd really like to have you as members, especially sustaining members, signing up for monthly contributions to help us focus our efforts on programming rather than fundraising. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and open it up to questions. If you all have anything you'd like to ask about EVs, please do so. I see a couple of people in here who are fellow EV owners, Model 3 owner and a Chevy Bolt owner. Especially Chevy Bolts are really great too. They're one of the other electric cars that have greater than 200-mile range on their battery and have access to fast charging networks, and they're very capable of doing long distance trips. the Electrify America network is recently expanding into the Tallahassee area. There's a station right next to the supercharger on Thomasville Road. And they allow you to, like I said, go basically anywhere. I've heard of people who have, Chevy Bolts have driven all the way from, Tallahassee to Miami, the same as my my Model 3 here. Another comment in here that there are EV chargers at the downtown library and at the East Side Branch Library, and that's absolutely right. Yeah, there's a public charging station at the Leroy Collins Library in downtown Tallahassee, and then also the East Side Branch Library that's on Mahan Drive. Question is if the city and county are planning to install more chargers for EV. I know for sure the county is. That's part of the county's integrated sustainability action plan, is that they plan to install further electric vehicle charging stations at properties that they own. So public parks, county-owned buildings. Not sure the exact specifics about where, but that is definitely in the plan. But one thing that we like to mention is that those kind of charging stations, those destination charging stations, are becoming increasingly unnecessary because the vast majority of the charging takes place at home. It's much more efficient and much more effective to just charge at home every night, the same way that you charge your cell phone, right? You get home from your day at work, you just plug it in, and the next morning you get up and you're ready to go. So the people who are usually using those public destination charging stations are people who don't have access to home chargers. So those who live in multifamily housing, so apartments. Even though I do see a comment in here that an apartment complex in town or somewhere recently installed 2 level 2 charging stations with dedicated power circuits, and that's absolutely great. That is one of the big barriers still to electric vehicle ownership, is people who live in densely populated areas in apartment complexes need a place to charge as well. So it's great to see that there is an apartment complex in Tallahassee that has recently installed them. Another comment about vehicle to grid. That's a really interesting technology that's becoming more and more integrated into electric vehicles. And that's where it allows the electric vehicle to act as a battery, storing electricity during times of lower grid use and discharging the electricity from the vehicle back into the grid during peak demand in electricity for the grid. And so that helps the electric companies kind of smooth out their demand load, which means that they have to generate less electricity during high demand times, which helps to reduce carbon emissions. And then the other benefit to that too is that down the line, what we're expecting to happen is that you could have effectively a battery for your house and your driveway. So, for example, if your power went out during a hurricane or some other kind of natural disaster, you'd be able to power your house via the electricity stored in the battery in your driveway. And that's increasingly important in a state like Florida that is so prone to hurricanes. And we're going to be even more prone to hurricanes as climate change increases the intensity and frequency of those storms. So vehicle to grid is a really, really great emerging technology that I hope to see integrated into more and more electric vehicles in the near future. The city is going to set some charges to city offices like the Renaissance Center intended for city employees. Yeah, that's true. That's another area that the city is planning to expand. And so that kind of workplace charging also really helps to encourage people who work at a location like that to buy an electric car. It's one of the ways that you can, if you own a business, you can encourage EV adoption among your employees, as the city and the county are doing. So one thing that, if you tuned into our first night's video with Jack Dieselhorst and Notary Public Underwriters, one part that we didn't show of Jack's business, that he actually has an electric vehicle charging station at his business as well. And those kind of programs are expanding more and more, especially if you offer the electricity for free as a benefit to your employees. So your employees can drive for free by charging it at work. And it's such a low cost that on the overall electric bill for a company, it's really not nearly as noticeable as you might think. So folks, please go ahead and ask as many questions as you like. Otherwise, I'm kind of talking to myself here. One story that I do like to tell is the story of the longest trip that I've ever taken in an electric car. So last Memorial Day, I drove from Tallahassee to Washington D.C. To go actually present my EV research at the International Communication Association's conference in D.C. there. And on the way up, I drove in 2 stages. I drove from here to Charlotte, North Carolina, and then from Charlotte to DC. But on the way back, I actually drove the entire thing in one shot, all the way from DC to Tallahassee, without stopping except to charge. And that was something that I really wanted to do, to be able to say to the naysayers who say, I really like to get there and back in one go and then not stop. You can do that. I wouldn't recommend it in any car, regardless of what it's fueled by. I would not recommend driving for 15 hours straight like I did. You should probably fly for that. That'd be a lot more enjoyable for you. But you can do it. You can drive all the way through. And one of the things that I noticed there was, like I said before, it's a much different experience where you're not having to constantly drive. That ability to stop every now and then really makes it so it's a lot more enjoyable. A comment or a question that came in here is talk about range anxiety. Range anxiety, the best cure for range anxiety is to drive one of these cars. I have experienced range anxiety exactly one time. And that was on that DC trip where my car told me to start in Tallahassee and to drive directly to Augusta, Georgia without stopping to charge. That was a distance of about 300 miles on a 325-mile battery. And so I was nervous about it. I was absolutely nervous. As it turned out, completely unnecessarily so. I got there with more than enough battery. And so one of the ways that I think helps me get over the range anxiety is, as you drive this car, as you get used to these cars, the predictor in there, the battery meter, where it shows you how much battery you have left and it knows your destination, is very accurate. It's absolutely accurate. So if the car tells you that you can make it, you can make it. And also with the increasing battery size and the increasing prevalence of electric vehicle of fast charging stations, it's not nearly as much of a problem as it was even 5 years ago. Especially with the new fast charging stations that are charging, like I said, at 500 plus miles per hour. If you get there with 10 miles left on your battery, you're ready to go to the next station in 20 minutes and 30 minutes. It's not nearly as much of a concern as it used to be. See, a comment in here. I've driven to Nashville and back a few times in his or her 240-mile range Model 3. Autopilot and superchargers make it a breeze. Yeah, couldn't agree more. And that's on the lower range Model 3, 240 miles. Like I said, these charging stations are located usually every 100 to 150 miles along interstates. And with your battery ranges being so high, there's easily you have enough range to get to the next charging station. And that's absolutely true, not just for Tesla, but for all electric vehicle models now, with the increasing prevalence of the Electrify America stations, EV Go stations, Charge America stations. There's a variety of other companies that are increasingly building out the EV fast charging network. Another thing, and thank you for mentioning this here, Stephen, a Better Route Planner. That is a website that you can go on. It's called abetterrouteplanner.com. You put in your starting destination and your ending destination, and you can factor in a whole range of variables, including what kind of car you're driving, the exact configuration of that car. So, for example, if you're in a Model 3 with either 18-inch wheels or 19-inch wheels, you can even factor in things like the temperature outside, the wind speed, whether the wind is coming at you or you got a tailwind or a headwind, and it will tell you exactly where to go, what stations to go to, for how long to stay there, and whether or not you can make it to that destination. And like I said, 9.9 times out of 10, you can absolutely make it to the destination. The only thing that I might mention is that sometimes with the in-car navigation systems, they'll tell you that you have enough charge to get to a destination, but not necessarily enough charge to get back out of the destination. So always be sure that if you're taking a round trip like that and you're not going to stop overnight, you're not going to stop to fully recharge, just be sure to double check that you're factoring in the return trip, the whole round trip when you're planning your trip on one of these route planners. Another question here, is the range increasing with newer models? What about buying a used EV, recommended or not? So the range absolutely is increasing every single day. If I remember correctly, the latest Tesla Model S is rapidly approaching 400 miles of range, and I know the Roadster that they're promising will come out in the next year or two is somewhere in the 600-mile range. Now, what you got to remember is that if you want to get one of those higher range models, you're going to pay more. You're going to have to pay more money to get that bigger battery. And really, if you think about it, that's the main driver of the cost difference between a gas-powered car and an electric car. So just, for example, a sheet metal gas tank is going to cost a whole heck of a lot less to produce than a high energy density lithium-ion battery. But the other thing too is that, like we said here, with the prevalence of the fast charging stations and the increasing availability of them, you don't necessarily even need that range. If I had to go back and make the same purchase again today, I probably would not opt to buy the more expensive, longer range Model 3. I'd probably go for the lower range one that costs less money because I simply don't need it. 240 miles, which is the lower end of the Model 3, is more than enough to make it between supercharging stations, and I wouldn't have needed to pay for that extra range. When I bought mine, the 325-mile variant was the only one in production. So I had no choice. But if I had to go make that decision again today, I probably would opt for the lower one. And yeah, hey, that's great to see that Jack here is in the comments. I was just thinking of this story as well. Jack has a first generation Model S that has a 205-mile battery range. And Jack drove that from Tallahassee to California and back with no problem. To the question about buying used EVs, that's also a great option. A lot of first-generation Nissan Leafs and Chevy Volts, and even first and second generation now Model S's are available for a lot less on the used market. And so, if you think about some of the drawbacks to that, will be the lower battery range, because that first generation had a lower battery range, and they also may have experienced some battery degradation. So if you're familiar with this, if you have a cell phone, for example, that's powered by a lithium-ion battery, over time with repeated charging and repeated discharging of that battery, it does lose its capacity. So electric vehicle batteries are much, much, much better about that than cell phone batteries are, but it does still happen. So you have to worry about, you have to consider that and make sure that you ask about that. What is the actual real world battery range of the particular vehicle that I'm buying? Not just what was it rated for when it was produced 5 or 6 years ago. But if you're buying, for example, a used Volt, a Chevy Volt, that has both an electric motor and a gas motor, so you would never have to worry about range in those. See, a lot of chatter about used Bolts coming off. So the Chevy Bolt with a B was the next generation of Chevy electric vehicle. That's an all-electric vehicle that has I believe it's a 238-mile range, where they're just now starting to come off of lease. Bolts are great cars too. If you can get one off lease that still has the the same battery range, that's a great deal. I would absolutely do that. It's as with buying any car. If you buy a new car, you lose value the moment you drive it off the lot. But if you want to have the latest, newest technology, the greatest availability, then you have to buy new. If your main concern is just to buy a good car that's electric, then yeah, you can't go wrong with a used car. So one other thing I wanted to mention too is that the autopilots. I'm surprised no one asked any questions about that. That's usually one of the big ones. How does it drive itself? That's a feature that has increased in usefulness over the years. So when the autopilot so how autopilot works is there are cameras on the vehicle, on the Teslas at least. There's a front-facing camera. There are 2 side-facing cameras by the wheels. There are 2 back-facing cameras on the pillars behind the driver and the passenger side. And then there's the rear view camera. And it takes in all of that visual data from the cameras, and via a supercomputer in the car, it actually steers the car in between the lane lines. So it keeps it within the two lanes, and it keeps it a set distance from the vehicle in front of you. And that has increased in capabilities and in quality over the years to the point where I absolutely do believe that if the regulations had caught up, that my car would be able to drive itself 100% with no intervention from me. For example, on that DC trip, it essentially drove itself all the way there and all the way back with minimal inputs from me. It even these days now will take highway interchanges and on-ramp and off-ramps in addition to passing slower cars, all completely hands-free on its own. And that's something that we'll absolutely show you in the virtual ride and drive that we're planning to do sometime here in the next couple of weeks. Another cool feature about that was very recently released is you can now stand up by the parking lot of a business or of a even in your own home if you wanted to, and summon the car, they call it. So you can call the car to you from its parking spot out in the parking lot. It will drive through the parking lot completely on its own with no input right up to you to be able to pick you up. And that's a feature that, like I said, just recently came out. I've heard that the next update is going to be where you can drive up to the business, get out, and tell it to go find a parking spot. And that's supposed to be coming later this year or whenever the Tesla team gets to it. But that's a thing that I wanted to point out there is that this is the only car I've ever heard of that gets better with time. So those features were not something that I had when I first bought this car. I actually received them via over-the-air updates via the internet, the same way you would receive an update for your computer or your cell phone. So the car is actually, they've added new features to it over time, to the point where I've even actually gotten a range boost and an acceleration boost via over-the-air software updates. My range increased from 310 miles to 325 miles, and it shaved a half a second off of my 0 to 60 time via software, which is absolutely insane. That you can just update some of the code and send it out, and your cars get better. And that's something that I will say that is something that only Tesla does. And I'm not a salesperson for Tesla. Even though I may sound like one, but the cars get better, and that's really something that's absolutely amazing. Comment came in here. Can I share any thoughts about whether the automation of transportation will positively impact the environment, sustainability, etc.? Yes and no. So one, automation of transportation, I think, is going to make transportation more accessible, which can only be a good thing. Allowing more people to be able to get out and move about and get to where they need to be is a good thing. We need to increase the equitability and the accessibility of transportation. And automated transportation absolutely does that, because you allow people who otherwise could not drive to be able to benefit from cars and not have to rely on things like ride sharing or public transportation, which, while those have their own benefits, may not be the best option for some people. As to the impact on the environment, automated transportation is more efficient. If you take the human factor out of the equation, it's more efficient, which in turn makes it more environmentally friendly, right? So, for example, think about if you were the driver and you come to a red light and you want to start off of that red light, you could go as fast as you could. You could floor it on the accelerator and go as fast as you could. And that's relatively inefficient. If you're a computer, the computer is going to factor in, is going to prioritize rather efficiency. So you're going to go slower, and it's not going to be as much fun for the driver. But if you're not driving, do you really care? And so the downstream effects of that means that you use less energy because you're not using it wastefully. So I think that long term, yes, it will be more beneficial to the environment, especially if you increase the efficiency of heavy duty vehicles, so like semi trucks, tractor trailers, those kind of things. That's the sector that will benefit the most environmentally from automation. Now, of course, the downside to that, and this is an area that we are very concerned about, is that economically, those are jobs that are being displaced. And so we do have to make sure that we strike a balance between new technology that's good for the environment, but also making sure that we don't just put a lot of people out of work, that we have a a way to make sure that they also have a livelihood. Going on, what's going on regarding recycling of lithium EV batteries? So I actually don't know as much about this topic in terms of if you take the car to a junkyard or a shredder or something like that, what happens to the battery? I know that you're able to do it, but I'm not entirely familiar with the process. I am, however, more familiar with taking the batteries out of the EVs as they are, having the battery cells maintain their structure and their integrity, and reusing those battery cells for another purpose. For example, energy storage. So I forget what company it was. I'm really sorry about that, but there is a company out there who, it might be Nissan, takes these cells from their old cars, repurposes them into energy storage, and puts them at places that have, for example, solar panels. So the solar panels charge the old EV batteries, which are then used kind of in the same way that the vehicle-to-grid technology is used, where it supplements the ability of the electric grid to produce energy, and also serves as a backup power generation for those facilities. And so it doesn't matter as much that those batteries may have lost some of their range, because you're not necessarily concerned about the range if the battery is stationary. So there's a lot of innovative ways that you can recycle those batteries for alternative purposes, rather than recycling the actual component materials to remake new batteries. So with that, I am not seeing any new questions. I'm going to give it another 30 to 40 seconds. One question I think I may have skipped earlier was about Sustainable Tallahassee's EV Expo and whether or not that's going to happen this year. So at this time, we are absolutely still anticipating being able to host that event in September. I certainly hope we're able to host that in September. I'd like things to be as back to normal as they can be by then. But if we are able to do so, we will advertise that event here on Facebook, on our website, sustainabletallahassee.org, and on our Twitter account, which is @SustainTally. Last year, I think we had 30 to 45 vehicles of a variety of different kinds. Increasingly, we're getting a lot of non-Tesla vehicles, which is great. It's great to see those other companies that are stepping up to manufacture EVs. This year, I know we will have the new Chevy Bolt and the new Nissan Leaf, as those vehicles have come out, but also we'll have the new Tesla Model Y, which is a crossover version of the Model 3. And that event allows you to, get in an EV, experience one for yourself firsthand, talk to owners firsthand. Last year, for the first time, we had ride and drives via a partnership with Electrify the South, which is a sister nonprofit organization that has an EV that you can actually get in and drive yourself to experience it. And with that, I wouldn't have done this, but I will read this. Thanks to Mike Mitchell for hosting 7 nights of this live on Facebook. I'll tell you, folks, I will never sign up to do 7 nights in a row again. Although I have enjoyed this, and I have enjoyed talking to you all and letting you know about the great things that are going on in Tallahassee and in Sustainable Tallahassee, the programs that we have. I'm really proud. I'm very proud to be the president of this organization, and I hope to be a member for many years to come. And I really look forward to expanding this, to being able to do more. And we can only do more if we have more members. So if you're not yet a member of Sustainable Tallahassee, please join us. Our strength really comes from our members. And if you're interested in being a part of any of these programs, information for how to get involved is available at sustainabletallahassee.org, or you can always reach out to me personally via email at mikemitchell@sustainabletallahassee.org. So with that, I will sign off, and I believe I will see you all next time, which will be later this month when we do a virtual EV ride and drive. And then we are also hoping to make this video series a monthly occurrence. Not a 7 days, not in a row, no. But once a month, we will be highlighting one of our programs via a Facebook live stream like this. So stick around, stay tuned to our Facebook page and our Twitter page, and we'll let you know when the next one of these is. So thanks, everybody, and good night.